Hi, I'm Karen. We're here at Montavilla Sewing Center, and today I'm going to show you how to sew your binding on completely by machine. As you can see, it looks nice from the front and from the back. So let's get started. First of all, you need to find out how many yards of fabric you need for your binding. Now your binding is going to be cut 2.5 inches wide, and you can use the width of your fabric that comes off the bolt, that many strips going across. Now, how do you figure that out? Well, as you can see, I have a very small quilt here, but you may have a much bigger quilt. So take your tape measure and measure all the way around your quilt that many inches, divide those inches by 40. 40 is a little bit less than the standard width of quilting fabric. So you divide that by 40 and then round up to the next whole number, and that's how many strips that you're going to need. Now, and allow enough yardage, maybe an extra 1/4 of a yard, to cut 2 or 3 more strips. That way you'll have plenty of binding. Now, as you can see, we've got a lot of threads on the edge here. That's because I cut my strips a long time before I was ready to actually put them onto my quilt. So what I'd suggest is wait to cut your strips until you're ready to actually use them, or if you cut them, put them in like a bag or something where they can not get a lot of abrasion. So I'm going to go ahead and neaten these edges up right now. And notice I've already got it folded, and I'm only trimming off these extra little threads right on the edge. That's all I'm trimming off. I'm not trimming off any extra fabric. Now, I want to show you something here. I've joined my binding, and I've joined this on the diagonal. That's a very standard way to join your binding. You can also join it straight across, but that's going to give you more bulk. This gives you less bulk joining it this way. And I'm going to do another video on how to do this. But for now, that's just the way it is. And for this project, I only needed 2 links, so just 1 seam is all I needed. Now we want to have these out of the way, these little threads, because if we don't, we're going to end up having to trim those off later when we're all done. It's just messier looking. I like to have my projects nice and neat. Okay, that part is done. To start out with, we want to set up our machine with a normal stitch length. Make sure you're using a straight stitch, and I'm using a center needle position. So, how much binding do we need for this quilt? And it looks like I'm going to have a whole lot extra. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out just roughly going around the perimeter, leaving a little bit extra, and it looks like I can cut off about 1 foot and still have plenty. For sewing it on, let me explain a little bit what we're going to do. If you were sewing this by hand, this binding by hand, you would sew it from the front, turn it over to the back, and then stitch it by hand. But we're going to sew it from the back and turn it over to the front and then stitch it by machine. Now you want to leave about 6 inches from where you start to where you end, so that way you can use that much to join the 2 ends of the binding, and then you'll stitch it the rest of the way. Now I'm using black thread because for video purposes it's going to show up a lot better, but normally you would use white thread or a very light color. Now I did sew the edge of my quilt to make sure that all the layers would stay together nicely. So we're going to leave plenty there. Start down here. Now this particular machine, the edge of the foot, it makes enough, I can just follow that along the edge of everything here. I've got the raw edges of the binding and of the quilt all lined up with the edge of the foot, and that seems to be about right. Now, your foot may be wider, in which case you might have to figure out how wide that's going to be. Setting up your machine, use at least a 2.5, maybe a 3 length, so that way if you do need to rip something out and start over, you can do that. Let's get started. And I like to have my speed slider a little bit slower so I can get a little more control, and needle down is always a good thing to do. Okay, let's go. Make sure that that gets right on that edge. Now notice the distance between the needle and the edge of the fabric. We want to stop that same distance between the needle and this perpendicular edge of the fabric. So I'm going to take a few more stitches, maybe one, there we go, so that I can go right to the corner. Now it looks like I took too many stitches. I'm going to undo that one, come back here, and I'm going to go right to that corner there like this, and needle up. Now I actually move this away from here so I get thread tail, so that is going to help me later on. Make sure that your threads are under the foot. That's important. Flip this up this way so you can see this makes a nice straight line. If it's not straight, then maybe you need to take some of those stitches out or redo the stitching, but it needs to be a nice straight line. And pull this down this way. Now this needs to be right here. That needs, those two edges need to be even with each other. They can't be like this or like that. They've got to be even with each other in order to make a nice mitered corner. Also, up here, I'm going to turn it a lot so you can kind of see. This fold in the binding needs to match up with the edge of the binding, not be further in and not be further out. Just right like that. It actually can be out this way a little bit to give it enough room, but not further in. All right. But pretty much match up everything. Everything should be all matched up. Take a couple of stitches. All right, middle down. Line this up really good. Take your time. When you're learning something, take your time. Now, as you can see, I'm getting to where that's going to join there, which is a good reason to make sure you have diagonal join right there. If I had all that bulk right on that corner to flip it up and do my mitered corner, that would make it kind of difficult to go through all those layers. Let me get my threads out of there, out of the way, make sure they're under the foot. I like to hang onto these threads. They're a good handle for when I'm getting started and when I'm lining things up. Okay. Take a couple of stitches, back stitch, line this up just like that. Okay, we're about done here. So now I'm going to just take a couple stitches like this, and we're going to take our fabric out from under the foot. And you can trim off all of these extra things at the corners. They are not necessary anymore, and they'll just kind of get in the way if we leave them. All right. Okay. Now we're going to need to join the ends of our binding. Now there's different ways to do this. We could do it on the diagonal like this, on the bias. That is actually going to take more time than we want to spend today. But there's another way that some people will join their binding, and that's by folding one end in and tucking the other end in like that. That leaves a little bit of opening here, plus you've got lots of layers when you finally get it turned around. That, in addition to the quilt, makes it a little bit much, so I wouldn't do it that way. What I'm going to do is a straight perpendicular seam. So I'm going to start out making sure everything's nice and flat, like this. I'm going to take my pin, put it right on the edge here, another pin on the edge here, so that those pins are just right next to each other. I'm just basically pinning the fold, is what I'm doing. You can even finger press it and then pin it. The idea is to get a fold or a mark going all the way across. All right, there we go. And you can take and iron it in if you want to, that's fine. The main idea is to know where your seam is going to be. Okay, Now, I'm going to take my binder clip. You can use Wonder clips. That's a great idea too. But the idea is to make less distance here on something that's fairly cardboardy, and this is nice and bendy. We want to have this to be able to match up really nicely. I'm going to go like this, put those right next to each other, and I'm going to take my marking pen and mark where those seams are going to be here on one side. There we go. All right. Now, I'm going to pin these together just to make sure they don't go anywhere. There we go. So you can see why we needed at least 6 inches of room here. Not too much more because you're going to have to make sure it fits well on there. So I've got this out to the side here. I've got my original mark and I just got the pin so that it keeps the 2 layers together. Then I'm going to take my short little ruler, and just mark going straight across. We don't want it diagonal, we don't want it bent in any way, but just going straight across like that. I'm going to pin those 2 together, and I'm just going to sew on that line right sides together, making sure the binding edges are all nice and even. In fact, I like to put my pins parallel to the line that I'm going to be sewing on. That way, I don't have to remove my pins as I go. And you do not need to backstitch on this. So if you do make a mistake, you can always rip it out. Easy peasy. Okay. Now, before you trim anything off, make sure that your binding is okay. You don't want it too long and gappy, and you don't want it really tight. That's a little bit tight just because I made sure that this is going to stretch a little bit, just like I did around the corners there. Once I trim this off, it should lay nice and flat. So take this, trim it off like that, get that out of the way. Then we're going to finger press this open like this. Fold it right along that original fold like this, and now we're going to finish that seam there. And also, I'm not going to backstitch because I'm not right on a corner. I'm just going to overlap the stitches from where they were before. Again, keeping the edge of everything even with the edge of the foot on this particular machine. And if you need to, you can use a little stiletto to just make sure everything stays nice and even. Now flip that corner up. You don't want to stitch that down. By the way, I'm using this nice little clover tool. It's got a little hooked end. It works great, and especially for the next part that we're going to be doing. All right, let's take this out. Cut the threads. So now the next part is we're going to flip this over and just barely cover that line of stitching with our binding like that. Now, if any of it does show, we're stitching all the way through all edges here, and you can actually rip that out. But that's why we would normally use white thread here. And I'm going to pin this right here. We're going to start at this corner, and notice the bulk on the back when I turn that is right here going to the right. We're going to have the bulk of the corner going to the left this way, and that's going to be a nice, neat corner. Love this tool here because it can hold on to things without me having to get my fingers too close. Okay. Back up a little bit. Here we go. And I'm going to be turning a corner, so I want needle down. There we go. Now you're going to get a little bit more bulk here, so if your stitching that you originally put in shows it all, it's going to be near the corner there. There we go. I can take this out. That was just to kind of keep things in place as I go. Now you can iron this. That would be okay to do that, just to make sure it's all the way to the edge, like that. Nice thing about this tool, it does help keep there from being folds in your fabric and tucks in your fabric, kind of helps spread things out a little bit better. Now notice I started a little bit past there. Actually, I'm going to take, and I didn't back stitch too much, I'm going to just take some of that out of there because I want to redo that corner, make it a little bit neater. It really depends on how neat you want things to be. But this tool is also good for removing stitches. There we go. Get that out of there. I'm going to neaten up that corner. There we go. That'll be perfect. Or as perfect as we want it to make. Okay. Here we go. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful. If you have, give us a thumbs up. And if you have comments or questions, you can put those in the area down below. We also have a video on how to join your bias on the diagonal, which reduces the bulk. That's right here. We have lots of other videos here on our Montavilla YouTube channel, so stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Bye.